But a lot can happen in a year. Do you agree? Or is it just me? So, a year ago, my amazing, quiet, calm husband, Chris Williams, and I were having a little walk. No, he's not quiet. He is mostly calm. We were having a walk in Wales, in the forest, right about this time of year, actually. And we just felt such a sudden sideswipe from God. We were leading a church at that time, and we were on kingdom assignment in a little part called Cardiff, North Cardiff. But we felt that there was a strong call, that there was something shifting. And when you're on an assignment from your king, you're ready. Be ready at any moment for anything. And that really is what being an ambassador of Christ is. We're on assignment for our papa. We're on assignment for our daddy. But to understand, I mean, if you know anything about an ambassador, ambassadors really do those, what are they called? Cultural attaché. Did I say that properly? They are that's a big word, hey? They are representatives. So you've got these ambassadors, these cultural attachés that will be, you know, in the kind of high commissions in a different country. So the French cultural attaché, got to be careful I say that, in France, they are there literally representing the governance of the country that they are sent from. So it goes without saying that if we're going to be an ambassador, a representative of the kingdom, which is who we are called to be, cultural shapers, then surely we need to know our king. Who or what are we representing? Now, we're not asking for perfection. Daddy is not asking for perfection, but he is asking for us to know him and to know his ways. And so we had this call in Wales, in this little forest, to head for South Africa. Whoosh, sudden left field. And we're like, what? And we started sharing this with people, and people are like, are you mad? Everyone's like leaving South Africa, big drama. And we're like, nope, Dad's called us there. And we began this journey of pushing and making moves to come to South Africa. And that's a whole other story for another day. But that's the excitement of being on assignment with Dad. The excitement. Are you ready to go where Dad calls you? You're on assignment now. When you walk out those doors now in the next 45 minutes, you're on assignment. Doesn't matter where you go or what you're called to, you're on assignment. And that's good news, isn't it? Do you know what else is good news? Is that actually we're called to bring heaven to earth. Now, you guys have clearly got something really, really right here. Did you know that heaven really is on earth, and it's in this very area? Promise you. So Chris and I went walking a few weeks ago, and we went through these forests. I love forests. And as we came out of this beautiful forest, boom, there was the sign for heaven. I was like, now I get it, God. Now I know why you called us here. But yeah, no, jokes aside. We really are called to bring heaven to earth, right here, right now, wherever you are. And what an opportunity, my friends. So this morning, I've got a couple of things that are objectives, as it were. I want you to be able to walk away knowing what I believe is something really key to being an ambassador of Christ, to being a culture shaper, okay? I want you to walk away knowing why it's vital as his disciples, as his ambassadors, that we walk in this virtue, in this value. And I want to show you from the word that this key is true. And more importantly, I want to show you how. I'm a coach, so I'm all about action. What's the action step? What are we going to do? It's not about knowledge, it's about action. Because we can have all the knowledge in the world, but then what? We want to put it into action. Jesus was all about relationship and action. And I want to walk the Jesus way. So what this morning is, okay, it's an invitation. Please remember this at all times, my friends. It's an invitation into a better understanding of what our daddy has for us, what his will is in our lives, his will for us in our lives, okay? And it's an invitation to a continued encounter, not a once a week little meal where we can feast and then nothing. It's an invitation to walk it out continually. What it's not, my friends, is a condemnation party. It's not a bunch of, oh, I suck. I'm not doing this thing well. I'm not doing this thing right. Da-da-da-da-da. It's not that, my friend. His grace. What a sweet feeling of grace this morning. What a sweet feeling of the Spirit's beautiful presence here. That is our daddy's heart, okay? an invitation. And I want to just read a verse to you, if you want to pop up the next slide. Thanks, guys. Matthew 11:27-30 in the Message. I love this verse. I haven't got my glasses on. I'm upgrading. I need glasses now. Jesus resumed talking to the people, but now tenderly. The Father has given me all these things to do and say. This is a unique father-son operation. Guys, we're on a father-son, father-daughter operation. That's who we are. Okay. Coming out of father and son intimacies and knowledge. So this unique father-son operation, father-daughter operation, comes out of intimacy and knowledge. Not just one, the both. Okay. No one knows the Son the way the Father does, nor the Father the way the Son does. But I'm not keeping it to myself. I'm ready to go over it line by line with anyone willing to listen. Anyone willing to listen this morning? He wants to go over it line by line with you. Are you tired? Worn out? Anyone tired and worn out here? Burned out on religion. Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. Wow, what a promise, guys. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Here comes some of my favorite part. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Jesus wants to show us how to do it. Why? I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Friends, that is kingdom. Kingdom is simply God's rule and reign here, his order. It's the order of the king. Where the king is, he rules, he reigns, his order. But he wants us to live it with freedom and lightness. My yoke is easy, my burden is light, okay? What an invitation. I'm up for that. Is it just me? So we need to understand our king, okay? So part of what I do, one of the hats I wear is I'm a certified health and life coach, and I do a lot of stuff around the whole neural development, neurotraining, brain training, wiring, all that kind of stuff. And there's something really cool that goes on in our brains. There's two things that are arguably really, really key. The first thing is those parts of our brain that keep our lungs breathing, our heart beating. I think that's pretty important. The other thing you might have heard is something called mirror neurons. Anyone heard of mirror neurons here? Yeah? So these things are basically the copycats. What they do is they copy unconsciously the behaviors, the thoughts, the actions, the patterns of the people that we spend the most time with, the things we spend the most time watching, reading, inducing, those mirror neurons, and we begin to imitate that. So again, this is a part that God has actually made in us, and so again I say, if we are going to represent the King, we got to understand, what are we actually watching, reading, who are we hanging around with? Okay, mirror neurons, true story. If you could pop the next slide up. One of my favorite long-distance mentors is a guy called Craig Rochelle. If you're into leadership training or development or anything of that sort, you'll know Craig's name. He says this about culture. Culture is a combination of what we cultivate and what we tolerate. Culture is a combination of what we cultivate and what we tolerate. We have our own personal culture. We have a culture within here. We have a culture within our workplaces. In your family, you have a culture. This nation has many cultures. It's a combination of what we cultivate and what we tolerate. And I want you to keep that in mind as we journey along a little bit. Barna, yeah, can pop the next slide up. Thanks, guys. Barna in the States, okay, I want to give you some statistics. I'm only going to give you the state statistics. If I was going to give you everything else around the world, we'd be here all day and probably feel very depressed. So we'll stick with the States. Barna in the States provides research-driven data and strategies with and for organizations across the globe, And they put this statistic out on Christianity just in America alone. Between 2000 and 2020, over 20 million people have left the Christian faith, and they now profess to be non-Christian. For example, atheist, agnostic, spiritualist, other. How do you feel when you read that? 20 million, over 20 million. That's like how many Cardiffs or how many Durbans? It's like 6.5% of the population of people have walked away from the Christian faith. That breaks my heart. That breaks my heart. My question is why? Why is this happening? Why is this happening? Why are so many people walking away from the Christian faith? My friends, there is a culture epidemic out there. We know who wins, but we're still in a battle. There is a kingdom clash out there. There is a kingdom clash. The fight is real. But we have been called for such a time as this, my friends. We have been called for such a time as this. It's time to take our rightful inheritance as his sons and daughters. And I'm going to play you a clip shortly. Chris and I have had the privilege of doing some training over an extended period. There's a guy called Alan Hirsch, who I think he's the founder of Verge Network. They're very much, their core kind of message is discipleship and culture shaping, culture change. And in Canada, there's guys that are in close partnership with him called Forge. And Chris and myself, and we took a bunch of people through extended training for a while. And Alan Hirsch, you'll see him speaking on the slide now, the clip now. He talks a little bit about culture. And I really want to ask you, it's only a couple of minutes, I want to ask you to be really open-minded when you listen to this. Hear what Father might be saying, especially when culture is a combination of what we cultivate, what we tolerate, and the fact that there is a true kingdom clash going on. So if you could just play the clip, just make sure it's up loud, guys, without, yeah, bad.
So discipleship and disciple-making is foundational to any movement. No matter which movement you observe, you will find that they're obsessed pretty much with discipleship and disciple-making. Everyone's a disciple, and no one ever stops being a disciple. And it appears that if we fail at this point, we have to fail every way. If we don't disciple, then the culture sure will. And it's doing a good job of it. And so we have to disciple over against the prevailing religious energies and powers of our day, which is, I think, the power of the market to determine our lives. The thing is, we're being profoundly discipled every day by a very sophisticated system called media and advertising. Trillions of dollars are put into it to manipulate our sense of self, who we are, our sense of worth, our identity. This is the task of advertising, is to create desire. It's really about desire. And if religion is anything, it's about desire. So that anyone who comes to Jesus in a Western context is already a well-discipled consumer. And it's a religion. Consumerism is being defined by what we consume. It is like I said, the search for meaning, identity, purpose, and belonging, tied to the consumption of products. The problem is that I think that consumerism is the alternative religion of our day. Without doubt, is the secular religion of our day. There's no such religious force in the West as powerful as consumerism. For me, the most simplest definition, I think one that gets to the core of what discipleship's about, is becoming more and more like Jesus, like the one I love. The way we worship Jesus is by obeying him. He calls us for utter obedience, because in the Hebrew mind, the way you worship is to obey. It's not simply giving words. It's actually becoming like. In a sense, my becoming like Jesus is what I'm designed eternally to be like. When we shall see him, we shall be like him. Look what the early church does. They grow like wildfire because they got disciples, not consumers. You cannot build a church on consumers. They will desert you at the moment's notice because they have no commitments beyond their own needs. You can't build on that. Jesus is quite wise in this. You can take his advice quite seriously. Quite literally. Die. Jesus can take 12, and by extension the 70, and build a movement that changes the world on disciples. He could never have done that on consumers. You've got people who are willing to pay the price. They've already died to their own agendas. They're now living for the Lordship of Jesus. With that, you can build movements.
Powerful stuff, isn't it? I love what it says there. In the Hebrew culture, to worship is to obey. To obey is to worship. And I love what Shani was saying on our announcements this morning. In fact, I've got goosebumps. To worship is to obey. To obey is worship. There's a reason Jesus was born into the Hebrew culture. Ever thought about that? There's something about that culture. Jesus is wanting our affections, my friends. He wants us. He wants us. He is so passionate about you and me and everyone out those doors. And guess what? We get to help them get to know him. We get that. But do you know what? There's affections being pulled in every single direction. He is a jealous God. He is a holy God. But flip, he's a good dad. He's a good dad. So again, culture is a combination of what we cultivate and what we tolerate. Is it possible that people are falling away because we haven't truly understood what kingdom culture is? Is it possible that people are choosing to walk away and find their affections in other places because we don't truly understand what the healthy fear of our Father is? What it is to be a culture shaper, a kingdom ambassador? You see, my friends, the culture we fully believe and subscribe to is evident in our behaviors and our habits. I'm a habit and behavior change coach. That's what I kind of do sometimes during the week. And I often say that what happens is our unconscious beliefs form our identity forms our behaviors, and our behaviors form our habits. It's those unconscious beliefs, what we subscribe to, what we truly believe, that comes out in our identity and our behaviors and our habits. Remember, this is an invitation. This is not a condemnation party. It's an opportunity. We are being invited by Daddy to go out there and introduce and show the world what our King is. So what's the opportunity? My friends, I honestly, with all my heart, maybe it's just me, maybe it's party for one, I don't know, but I believe that we are on the verge of one of the greatest, most exciting moves of the Spirit out there. Come on, for such a time as this, and we get to witness that. There is a deep call, I believe, of the Spirit of God moving across the earth right now, not only to help us understand the holy fear of the Lord, but to actually walk in it. Action. Action. Jesus is all about action. Read the book of Mark. It's action immediately. I believe that Father God, Jesus Christ, His Holy Spirit, is leading us or inviting us as His children, okay, through a purifying, testing time. Why? Because He wants to reveal His sons and daughters who will represent, reproduce, and reflect the Father accurately. Not perfectly, but accurately. Who will point to our Father right here, right now. Why? Because God so loved the world. It's not just about us. It's not just about us. You can show the next slide, my friends. 2 Corinthians 7 verse 1 from the ESV says this. I love what Paul's talking about. He says that holiness is perfected. And that word perfected isn't perfect as we think. It's matured or completed, okay? It says that it's matured or completed in the fear of the Lord. He says, since we have these promises, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from every defilement of body and spirit, bringing holiness to completion in the fear of God. Hang on. We've got to cleanse ourselves. Surely Jesus does that. Yes, that's called justification. This, my friends, is sanctification. We've got to cleanse ourselves. We've got to show up to the party. We get to do something, okay? The Bible says that we're called to work out our salvation with not loving and kindness. Sure, fear and salvation, my friends. Yes, loving kindness flows from that. There's a difference between loving God and fearing Him. And He's inviting us to truly understand what the fear of the Lord is. If you love me, you will watch my commandments, obey my commandments. You seeing a picture unfolding yet, my friends? Good news. Good news. I want you to just close your eyes for a moment, okay? I just want to invite you to close them, not for any weird heebie-jeebie reasons, just because I don't want you to be distracted. If you don't feel comfortable, that's okay. What if I told you that there was a hidden virtue that in essence was the key to all life? First for us, and then those that we're called to impact. What if I told you that it unlocks purpose in our life? It attracts the presence, the provision, and the protection of our Father? What if I told you that it's the root of all noble character? What if I told you that it's the foundation of all happiness, the beginning of all wisdom? What if I told you that it provides all the wisdom and harmony that you need to anything that we face daily? What if I told you that it guarantees success, safety, good health, long life, a noble legacy? You can open your eyes. Sounds a bit too good to be true, doesn't it? But the truth is that these words were actually written by one of the greatest leaders who ever walked the earth. He was a phenomenal influencer, an impactor amongst kings, nations, generations. He was also considered one of the wisest man on earth. He was raised by a mom and dad who taught him the holy fear of the Lord. But there was one problem. He didn't treasure that fear of the Lord. He didn't cultivate that fear of the Lord. What happened? He became jaded, critical, cynical. He lost the fear of the Lord. But it's really interesting that Solomon, right at the end of Ecclesiastes, leaves us a clue. I believe success leaves clues. He says a very interesting thing. Now, this is apparently the wisest man on earth. Now, wow, what could the wisest man on earth possibly have left us with? But this is what his words were. When all has been heard, the end of the matter is this. Fear God, obey His commands. Doesn't sound very exciting, does it? Or does it? Fear God and obey His commands. Success leaves clues, my friends. Success leaves clues. You see, why would fear of the Lord be such an important thing for us as His sons and daughters? Why? Why is it so important? Loving God, all that, yes, great stuff, but why? Why is fear of the Lord? Because, my friends, it produces hope. And the fruit of hope is endurance. 1 Thessalonians talks about it. You see, it keeps us in the game, my friends. It keeps us in the long haul because it's going to get tough. It gets tough. I have tough days. I don't know about you. But the fear of the Lord is what keeps us keeping on. Why are so many people turning away from their Christian faith? Is it possibly because they don't know and have and walk in the fear of the Lord? You see, my friends, I believe that the fear of the Lord is not to be scared of our papa. It's not to be scared of our daddy. He's a good dad. He's a good daddy. Do you know that? Do you believe that? Do you feel that? I believe that the fear of the Lord is to actually be heartbroken at the thought of being away from Him. To be heartbroken at the thought of being away from Him at any given moment. I think about Andrew and Taryn, and They're in their early stages of getting married, and there's a few other friends here. But when you're so in love with someone, you don't want to be away from them, do you? Do you have fights? Do you have arguments? You don't have to tell us. Of course we do. Do we have fights and arguments with God? I do. I'm often like Dad, but it's to be heartbroken to be away from them. That is the fear of the Lord, my friends. It's to be heartbroken at the thought of being away from our Papa and not to walk as our Papa does, to want to please our Daddy. Not because we're terrified, not because we're scared, not because we're afraid he's going to bash us over the head, but because we know his heart so well that to do anything else would break our hearts. It would break our hearts. It's to venerate him, to honor, to respect, to esteem, to value above anything else, to stand in utter awe of our Daddy. I love the Bible. It's such a great blueprint. And what's really cool is there's a lot of people that Father talks about in there that, he calls his friends. Some he even says he tells them his secrets. Success leaves clues. And there's a really cool person I want to kind of look at just for a little bit called Abraham. We know the story so well, don't we? Abraham. What a guy. Did you know that God chose him for a specific reason? God singled him out. Let's have a little look at what Genesis 18:19 says. For I have chosen him that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abram what he has promised him. Wow. So what God promised him, there was some stuff. To keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice. What a culture shaper. Wouldn't you agree that Abram was a culture shaper? So Genesis 22, I'm going to invite you, if you want to go there, just quickly, I'm going to go to the NIV. I just want to read you something, and then we're going to slowly start to land the plane. But success leaves clues. There's something in here. So Genesis 22. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. Verse 3. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, stay here with this donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. And he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, Father. Yes, my son, Abraham replied. The fire and wood are here, Isaac said, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering? Shae. Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. Wow, look at that, eh? And the 2 of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Abram looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the place, the Lord will provide. And to this day it is said, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed. Why? Because you have obeyed me. Obedience. So what does that mean for us in practice, my friends? And I've just spent some time drawing a number of principles from 5 principles from this incredible story. And I want to share them with you because I really believe that it's not an exhaustive list, but I believe that these are evidence of behaviors in our life of someone who has a healthy fear of God. And, again, it's not a condemnation rally, but it's a helpful thing to go, God, actually, search me, purify me. Purify me through these ways. So if we look through the story, I believe that evidence of someone who has the fear of the Lord, healthy, holy fear of the Lord, is that we obey instantly. Early the next morning, Abram got up and ... Folks, it was a 3-day journey. I think that gave Abraham some time to back out. Don't you? What has God been speaking to you about? Well, Shae, it's been about 2 or 3 years, and I felt God saying this. And now, yes, there is a process when we walk things through, but what has God been saying that instantly we need to obey? What was the last thing he asked you and he's required instant obedience of? We obey even when it doesn't make sense. Does it make sense? Why did it have to be Isaac? Surely there was other options. Does it make sense to spit in a person's eyes to heal them? Does it make sense to forgive someone when they've done the most awful thing to us or your children or loved ones? What's God asking us to obey, even though it doesn't make sense? We obey even when it costs, when it hurts, my friends. When it hurts. What's that thing that you value above anything else? That he's asking you, he's requiring, that he's calling us to let go of, step into, change. What's that thing that costs so much? But God says there, now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. We obey even when we don't see a benefit. What possible benefit did Abram have? What possible benefit? What did he get to gain out of it? What is God requiring of us that we don't see a benefit to? We don't get anything from it. Do we trust our daddy? He sees the bigger picture. And then lastly, we obey to completion. We obey to completion. It was right at that last moment, as Abram was about to complete, that he heard a voice stop. And then there was the provision. Is it possible that the very thing that we feel God has promised us or is calling us to might only come to fruition because there's something we need to complete? We haven't been obedient to completion in something. My friends, it's an opportunity. And, as we look at those different points, like, where do we sit in that space? Where do we fit in that place? Where are our affections going? To obey is to worship. To worship is to obey. He's a good dad, my friends, and I want to encourage you that this is an opportunity to get to know your daddy even more, to get to know your king even more, so that the fullness of his promises in your life can flow through you and out there to where he wants to take you to impact, to a world that he's desperately in love with.